There is a scene in a Monty Python movie about Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Apparently, it was difficult for the characters in the sketch to hear what Jesus was saying. Big crowd, no sound system. I'll always likely think of that sketch when I hear this passage of Scripture. "What was that?" one of the characters asks. "I think he said, 'Blessed are the cheesemakers.'" "Well, what's so special about cheesemakers?" another person asks. "Well, it's obviously not meant to be taken literally. It refers to manufacturers of any dairy products." You're welcome. I didn't give you a British accent for that sketch. Clearly, the comedians of Monty Python were making a joke, but I wonder if there isn't some truth in it too, because cheesemakers might just as well be listed as a category of people who are blessed. It is a very inclusive list Jesus gives us. And at some point in our lives, we inhabit all of those categories. Okay, maybe we aren't cheesemakers. Wait, do we have any cheesemakers in this congregation? I need to know that. I really love cheese. At some point, whether or not we are cheesemakers, we mourn and we cry over the pain in our lives and the pain in the world. At some point in our life, we feel poor in spirit. We feel meek. We feel hungry for justice. One of my friends asked people on social media to finish the sentence, "Blessed are you who?" And the answers were interesting. Blessed are you who remember to laugh even when you want to cry. Blessed are you who write books for us to read, who compose music for us to hear, who create art for us to view. Blessed are you who speak the truth in love. Blessed are you who help us keep our sense of humor and not take ourselves too seriously. Blessed are you who have cancer, and blessed are those who accompany and love them. Blessed are the caregivers. The list could go on, and I think that is the point. We hear in our culture that blessings should be limited, that only the rich or the powerful or the successful are blessed. And Jesus calls us to impart blessings, to be blessings, to proclaim blessedness in situations that might least expect to be called blessed. The message in the Beatitudes, which might sound familiar and comfortable language to those of us who have heard this passage again and again, this would not have seemed familiar language to Jesus' audience on the mountain that day, which is why that Monty Python sketch is so true. I imagine the crowd saying, "What did he just say? He couldn't possibly have said, 'Blessed are those who mourn.' I must have heard him wrong. Blessed are you who are persecuted. What is he talking about?" Because many of the things Jesus lists as blessings are not things we want to sign up for. We don't want to have to mourn for the pain in our own lives or mourn for the injustice and hurt in the world. We don't want to have to be poor in spirit, acknowledging that we can't do it all ourselves and that our only help and salvation comes from God. We don't want to be meek, patiently waiting for God's time that will come someday. We don't want to be peacemakers, having to listen for the truth in what our opponent is saying when we could just loudly proclaim our own truth ourselves. And we don't want to be persecuted for righteousness' sake because we know that the powers of this world work hard to keep the world unjust, and speaking against injustice can put you in harm's way. Why would we want to do that? The Beatitudes don't tell us to intentionally set out to become mourners or persecuted or poor in spirit just so we can say we have done it. That would turn our faithful action into an attempt to earn our salvation. We are instead to recognize that God is creating blessing, that God is present in the midst of situations that society would call God forsaken. The Beatitudes remind us that people aren't blessed because of their success, wealth, or power. They are blessed because God chooses to be with them and for them. It is a reminder to bring hope to the seemingly hopeless situations in our lives. It is a reminder to speak a counter message to those who oppress, to those who benefit from injustice and pain, and to those who try to earn their own blessing at the expense of others. While the Beatitudes offer comfort and hope for people in desperate need of it, they also challenge us to make a world that more closely resembles God's intention for it, so that the Beatitudes will be just considered a statement of fact for all God's children. After we get to the blessed are verses, Jesus tells us we are the salt of the earth and the light to the world. Now, living out the Beatitudes, being a blessing to the world, is part of how we are God's salt and light. Light is an image we explore frequently and understand more intuitively, perhaps, than the image of salt. Yet salt has held such value in history that roads were paved just to trade it. The Latin word that gives us salary comes from the word salt. Salt has been extracted from the earth and from the ocean for thousands of years, and its value has often been equal to precious metals. Salt is necessary for human life. It is a primary taste on our tongues, and we often notice salt by its absence or when there is too much. The just right amount of salt often goes unnoticed on our palate. So if being blessed is being salt of the earth, it means being the ingredient that is valuable and that gives life, but that is not shiny and calling attention to itself. Salt is not like other spices and seasonings. God does not call us to be spicy like cayenne pepper or green chili, which would be my preference. God doesn't call us to be dramatic like saffron, which only takes a small pinch to change the entire color of a dish, visible to everyone. God doesn't call us to be the whole enchilada either. We are one ingredient among many, a part of a bigger recipe. Nobody serves a bowl of salt as a complete meal. We are not the only thing that can feed the world, but without salt of God's blessed community, the world is missing flavor and important nutritional components. Once salt is added to a dish, it cannot be removed and it loses its shape. Salt dissolves into broth and it disappears into dishes. Perhaps we have to be willing to let go of the identities and agendas we hold if we want to be blessing and be salt of the earth. God doesn't call us to be the bay leaves for the world, which season a dish but are then removed intact before the dish is served. We're in it the whole way through. Listen to the blessed are verses again. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. In many ways, these qualifications of being poor and mourning and meek and hungry and merciful and pure, they're just the qualifications that settle down into the cracks and crevices in our lives like salt, dissolving into our very identity, invisible to the eye in most cases. They are some of the very characteristics that make us most human. Today is All Saints' Day, the day we remember those people who have died in the past 12 months from our congregation and from our lives. We call them saints not because they were perfect or holier than the rest of us, although maybe some of them were. We call them saints because God made them holy and made them blessings. Friends, we are saints too. Today, we also remember the over 200,000 people who have died from the coronavirus in this country, and we lift up their lives to God that they may rest in eternal blessing. And we lift up the people in our own lives who have died in the past year, fathers and mothers, sons and daughters, spouses and siblings and cousins and friends and neighbors. Often it isn't until a loved one has died that we realize the way they were salt in our lives. It is in their absence that we notice the taste of the recipe of our lives has gone a little flat. So as we mourn our saints, may our tears season our memories and lead us through grief and into flavors of joy. As we live into these Beatitudes, friends, we have to let go of the idea that we can know love without mourning, that we can be filled without seeking justice, that we could see God without attending to the state of our hearts, and that we can inherit the earth from a position of power. In a few days, our country will vote. Many of us have already voted, and I know many of you have been active in getting out the vote and volunteering and phone banking. It feels like a pivotal moment for us. No matter how the election turns out, no matter which candidate you are supporting, there are important issues down the ballot too. How we live into the results of this election will reveal a lot about us. Are we salt, willing to play our role as an important ingredient in building a better recipe for our country? Will we be salt, welcoming the contribution of other seasonings to create a more flavorful nation? We will gather for an in-person prayer service on Wednesday after the election. You can register through the website because space will be limited so that we can keep distancing. In the aftermath of the election, we will neither gloat nor despair. We will turn in prayer to God with renewed purpose to care for others, to seek the common welfare, to build a better and more compassionate world. I confess that being salt doesn't come naturally to me. I have control issues, and I don't want to dissolve. I want to loudly claim my opinions and be a maverick solo act. But God has called me again and again to be in community, to care more for common values than for private rights. Again and again, God reminds me that my control is less powerful than my surrender to God's vision and wisdom. And so I work at being salt. One of my favorite poets, Naomi Shihab Nye, writes in her poem, Kindness, these words: "Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things, feel the future dissolve in a moment like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore, and kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to gaze at bread. It is only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, 'It is I you have been looking for,' and then goes with you everywhere like a shadow or a friend." I think the kindness she speaks of in this poem is not unlike the blessedness Jesus offers in the Sermon on the Mount. It is subtle. We notice it most by its absence, and kindness too dissolves like salt in a broth, seasoning our lives with mercy, love, compassion, and justice. Friends, you are the salt of the earth, so go and share your blessedness. Amen.
They will come